Hi, this is Kent, and welcome to another session of Deepening Your Spiritual Toolbox. I am filming this from one of my favorite places, Beverly Commons Woods in Beverly, Massachusetts, not too far from where I live. And it is springtime. Springtime in New England. The weather is starting to change. And today it's in the high 50s. And so I'm still having a cup of coffee to warm myself up a bit, but today is going to get warmer and warmer, and life is emerging. Life is emerging all around us. So wherever you are viewing this from, I'm just glad to be with you, and I hope you can put your feet up for a few minutes, maybe grab a warm beverage yourself or a cool beverage, and we can talk about life in the spirit. And today I'm going to be reflecting upon a couple of books that I'm reading recently. One is this book called Field of Compassion. Field of Compassion. It's by Judy Cannato. And it's about the new cosmology and how it is transforming the spiritual life. And in this book she is talking about how the cosmos is full of galaxies, billions of galaxies, and how everything is interconnected, and of how gravity holds all things together, these galaxies. She talks about how less than 100 years ago it was believed that our Milky Way galaxy was the only galaxy there was, and that there was a collection of stars called Andromeda, just a collection of stars out in the distance from our own galaxy. And then a man named Hubble created a telescope in Southern California, and there in the Wilson Planetarium he began to view the galaxy and found that there were galaxies beyond our galaxy. Indeed, with more sophisticated technology and the Hubble telescope that was sent up into space a decade or so ago, we have found that there are billions and billions of galaxies, and that there is this intricate network that connects all of these galaxies one to the other. And it's a reminder that interconnectedness is part of the fabric and fiber of life, of all that is. And on a beautiful day like today, when I'm surrounded and bathed in sunshine, and I can hear the birds around me, and the bulbs are beginning to emerge up from the soil, it's a reminder of life and how everything is connected in an intricate web. And if one part of the web begins to falter, everything falters. If gravity were to give way, if gravity were to dissipate, then all of the galaxies would collapse into themselves. Imagine. Everything has a place. These forces of nature, close at hand and on a cosmological scale, have a purpose. And I don't know about you, but I find that reassuring. Because I have a tendency, I don't know about you, to take myself seriously, as if Kent is the center of the world, Kent's world, and everything else revolves around me, revolves around my drama, my thoughts, my dreams, my schemes. And I think that's part of human nature, right? We tend to be person-centric. Yet Judy Cannato, in her wonderful book, The Field of Compassion, reminds all of us that the world is more intricate, more complex, more wondrous than we can imagine, and that each of us is but a small part of it. And that doesn't cause me to feel insignificant. Rather, it caused me to have a profound sense of significance, but I don't overstate my role. So I was reflecting on this recently with my spiritual director, a guy named John, who's like my pastor, and I meet with him once a month, and we talk about my spiritual journey. And I was talking about this sense, what I've been reading in this book, and this sense of the vastness and complexity of the universe, and yet I have a place. We each have a place within it, as does all of the natural world within which we live. The daffodils, the tulips that are emerging, the mammals that are coming out of hibernation, all of that has a place. And yet it also got me thinking about how we often forget about our interconnectedness. And I was thinking about that primarily last night when I heard the results of the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. He was accused of murdering George Floyd. And on all 3 charges, second and third degree murder and on manslaughter, he was found guilty. And Derek Chauvin will go away to prison for a very long time. But it got me thinking about what happened to Derek Chauvin. He wasn't raised that way to bring about this sense of injustice towards another human being. To watch that 9-minute and 26-second video where Derek Chauvin, the police officer then from Minneapolis, kept his knee on the body of George Floyd, upon his neck, till he lost consciousness, and then he stopped breathing. And still, Derek Chauvin kept his knee upon George Floyd's neck until he was pronounced dead. How did Derek Chauvin become so numb to the humanity of George Floyd? And I think it's a larger question for us as human beings. How do we become numb towards the needs of our brothers and sisters? How can we go to sleep at night knowing that there are struggles all around the world? How is it that we can become indifferent, particularly as a white male like myself, can become indifferent or unawake to the needs of my sisters and brothers of color who are dealing with systemic racism around our nation and around the world? What does it mean to become awakened? And I think it comes, this awakening, what the Buddhists would call enlightenment, comes when we are aware that we belong to one another, that we have a responsibility to one another, and that when one suffers, we all suffer. When one person is in need, we are all in need. And oftentimes as human beings, we forget that. And Derek Chauvin is just a crass, dramatic experience of what happens when many of us become indifferent to the needs of others. A child doesn't grow up being numb to the needs of others. When we are children, we are just embracing the beauty of nature. We are awed by the complexity of the natural world, and everything from a butterfly to a buttercup has inherent interest, and we as children are curious. And we play with one another. We don't judge one another by the shades of our skin or by our background. We embrace one another. We're friends with one another. We'll play with anyone. But over time, it seems that society teaches us something different. Something happened to Derek Chauvin that allowed him to no longer see the humanity in another. Something happened to Derek Chauvin that he was indifferent to the need of another. He had lost sight of the interconnectedness that he had and we all are to have with one another. We become numb too to the needs of our environment, right? I'm in this beautiful place right now, but we know that climate change is real. We live in a culture that is driven by consumerism, by capitalism. And that is a very transactional relationship. It's as if the natural world, the trees and the air and the water are commodities for us to mine for our own purpose. And so we have profoundly messed our nest so that this generation and immediate generations to come are at risk for a lack of clean air and clean water, and the waters are rising, and it's displacing people, particularly people in low-lying regions who have few resources to make a change? What does it look like when we have a sense of responsibility to one another? My spiritual director, who I was meeting with this week, said, Kent, ultimately, it's about love. Because love is about relationship. He said it may sound simplistic, but it's profoundly challenging. Jesus, in the Great Commandment, is asked by someone, what must I do to inherit eternal life? In other words, what must I do to be connected to God? What does it mean to walk in harmony with the ways of God? And Jesus says, it's simple. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love God completely. And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus, in so many examples, explains that our neighbor is not just folk like us, but people who are different like us, different colors and different cultures and different languages and different religions and different backgrounds. They are our neighbor as well. And in a variety of teachings in both the Hebrew scriptures and in the teachings of Jesus, a reminder that all of the natural world is our neighbor as well. That I have a responsibility for the well-being of the natural world, because that too has inherent worth and meaning. Because what the Hubble telescope has made clear to us is that the universe is interconnected and it is more complex than we can possibly imagine. And climatologists would tell us today that unless we take care of the earth, unless we take care of the nest within which we live and breathe and have our being, then all will be lost, all will collapse. It's all about relationship. It's all about loving God, the creator of all that is, including you and me and the natural world. It's about loving our neighbor in the broadest possible sense. And it's about loving ourselves. And I think sometimes we have difficulty loving ourselves as well, right? So it's all about relationship. It's moving from a capitalistic, consumeristic culture to have a sense of purpose and meaning and joy. It's a reminder that we belong to each other. And I think the way in which we can eradicate the systemic racism that has been with the history of our country for over 400 years is to remember that when one is experiencing injustice, we all experience injustice. The people who called for Derek Chauvin to take his knee off George Floyd's neck, who gathered outside of that bodega in a neighborhood in Minneapolis and said, let him go, he can't breathe. And Derek Chauvin didn't do that. And the police officers around him didn't intervene on George Floyd's behalf either. And so it was a teenage girl who videotaped what was happening and then put it out on the internet. And it captured the mind and imagination of all of us. It awakened white folk like me who don't live with systemic racism to see the injustice that was going on with George Floyd as the breath left his body for the final time. We were enraged by it. We couldn't turn away from it. We saw that we belong to one another, and when we remember and act as if we do belong to one another, when we stand in solidarity with one another, when we call for systemic changes in policies, in our judicial and in our policing system, when we call for sound environmental policies that protect the earth today and for generations to come, then we are on the path to freedom. Then we are on the path of love. In the scripture it says, perfect love casts out fear. There's a word for love in the Greek language, which is the language of the New Testament, which is my own tradition. And that word is agape. And agape love is a selfless love. It is a building up love. It is a love of solidarity. It is a love that connects us one to the other. George Floyd was my brother and your brother. We belong to one another. And when we remember this, when we live according to this, we know that what Abraham Lincoln called a more perfect union will be brought about. What Dr. King called a beloved community will be brought about. It's not rocket science how to live and how to love, but it isn't easy. We need each other to bring about change, to bring about healing, to bring about restoration and hope. My great prayer is that George Floyd's murder was not in vain, that we've learned a lot as a people, and that we won't go back to the old way of being and the old ways of being numb and not seeing, that we will embrace one another as sisters and brothers. And may we do so in George's name, and in the name of one another, and in the name of all that is. Thanks for tuning in, and go out, each in our own way, and make a difference. Thank you.